In this episode, we talk about Chhattisgarh, where thousands of midday meal cooks have been sitting in protest for demanding wages that allow them to survive. We also take a look at communal flare-up in Assam, leading to the deployment of the Rapid Action Force and suspension of internet services. But first, we talk about the United States' audacious capture of Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro. Hi, I'm Ichha Sharma, and you're listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. It was earlier this month when United States forces captured the 63-year-old Venezuelan president Nicolás Maduro and his wife First Lady Celia Flores, removing them from the country in a dramatic military operation. Maduro had ruled Venezuela for around 13 years, with a firm grip on power, winning 3 consecutive presidential terms in elections that were widely questioned by international observers. Now, initially, US President Donald Trump described the intervention as an anti-drug operation. In fact, the US has accused Maduro and his wife of engaging in cocaine trafficking conspiracy and associating with cartels designated as terrorist groups. They are now being tried in a New York federal court where both have pleaded not guilty to multiple charges including narco-terrorism and drug trafficking. But within hours of the operation, Trump began openly talking about Venezuela's oil reserves, saying that United States would take control of those reserves and bring in American companies to invest billions of dollars in refurbishing the country's oil industry.
So we are going to run the country until such time as we can do a safe, proper, and judicious transition. And it has to be judicious because that's what we're all about. We're going to have our very large United States oil companies, the biggest anywhere in the world, go in, spend billions of dollars, fix the badly broken infrastructure, the oil infrastructure, and start making money for the country. And
Since then, the president has even met with top US oil executives. But the enthusiasm on the corporate side hasn't exactly matched his own. Some industry leaders, in fact, have openly expressed serious concerns about the challenges of extracting oil from Venezuela under the current conditions. To unpack the reasons behind that hesitation, my colleague Shashank Bhargava speaks to the Indian Express's national business editor, Anil Sasi.
Anil, to begin with, could you give our listeners a sense of just how large Venezuela's oil reserves are?
Well, Shashank, on paper, the Venezuelan reserves are massive, perhaps the highest in the world. But there are multiple issues with that. One, Venezuelan crude has been prospected by American companies long back in the 50s and the 60s. But when it comes to actual drilling and taking the oil out, there are issues in the manner in which, tapping of this potential has happened over the years. And there's been a steady downtrend over the last 10 years, 10 or 15 years, because there were 2 waves of nationalization that happened in Venezuela under Hugo Chavez. And then at this point in time, there is a Venezuelan national oil company called PDVSA, which essentially does all of the drilling and all of the prospecting. They don't have much technology. They've just been able to tap less than about 1% of what the actual reserves seem to be. The reserves also, that figure is a little contentious because people say that it might be lower than that.
Right, because many say that these are based on very old estimates.
That is right. So it was in the 50s and the 60s that essentially American oil companies had done the early prospecting. A lot of these estimates go back to that time. Since then, you've had phases where the private companies, European and American companies that have operated there. At this point in time, there is only one American company, Chevron, that has some operations there. Otherwise, it's pretty much PDVSA, that the state-owned national oil company, that is doing all of the drilling and all of the oil refining at this point in time.
And you mentioned that the current output is just 1%, right? So what is the reason behind that? Is it a lack of efficiency? Is it the oil itself?
So there are 2 parts to it. One, of course, is the quality of the oil. The Venezuelan oil is what they call heavy sour variant of crude. Now, heavy would essentially mean that it is viscous. Sour would mean that it will have quite a bit of sulfur. There are only a few refineries in the world that can tackle that kind of oil. It is not the shale kind of oil, which would be sweet, which would mean lower sulfur content. And it would be light, which means that in terms of viscosity, it is much less than what the Venezuelan crude is. There are only a handful of refineries that can tackle that kind of crude. A lot of the refineries in the American southern coast around the Gulf of Mexico are equipped to handle this, which is the reason why perhaps Donald Trump is interested in this crude, because they have the setup there. They have the refineries there. But because Venezuelan crude has not been flowing in, those refineries are either idling or are, suboptimally utilized. The other factor is with respect to, the fact that a lot of investments need to be done to get the oil out of the ground. Those investments have tapered off. Those investments were on till the time that the Americans, the European companies, the big ones, were still in the game. But in these progressive waves of nationalization, what has happened is that companies such as ExxonMobil and ConocoPhillips, they've had to sort of flee from Venezuela because the nationalization happened sort of abruptly overnight, and they had to leave assets. In fact, at this point in time, these two companies, ConocoPhillips and ExxonMobil, have sued the Venezuelan government for about $10 million. And that money is, it's still not been recovered.
Yeah, and besides this, what we know is that pretty much all the crude oil there had been going to the Chinese, right?
Absolutely. In fact, the Chinese have what is called this oil for cash kind of a mechanism, where they essentially have a sort of a barter platform for oil against other traded goods. And at the time that the operation happened, the American operation that extracted Nicolás Maduro, the Chinese had claims of around $19-20 billion that is still unpaid. A lot of the vessels that were en route to China, they've been stopped. The Russians are also interested. The Russians have been strategically invested in Venezuela for a while. And Rosneft, the state-owned Russian oil company, has an office, a couple of floors apparently that they own in the office of PDVSA, the state-owned Venezuelan miner. So that's how close the companies are.
Right. So is that the reason why many of these oil companies are not exactly thrilled by what the US is doing? Because Trump had called a meeting with all the major oil executives. And in that meeting, for instance, Exxon openly expressed reservations about going into Venezuela to extract oil or make any further investments. So is it because the projects would require huge investments and because the quality of the oil is not very good? Are those the reasons why these companies are hesitant?
I can think of two key reasons. There could be more. One is that some of these companies that the Trump administration is talking to have had to flee overnight and leave their assets. It's very difficult for an organization to sort of forget the memory of having sort of invested in a place and then, have to leave it overnight and then struggle to get the money back. The second thing is that a lot of these companies would be evaluating the options. How long is Trump in office? Maybe 3 years. What happens after the 3 years? If a petroleum company were to start the drilling today, it will take about 3 years for the first lot of oil to come out. By that time, Trump would be gone. We don't even know what the administration in Venezuela is going to be like. It's only Maduro who's been extracted. The rest of the setup is still there. The vice president who's now become president, Delcy Fernandez Rodriguez, and their interior minister and the defense minister who were, said to be fairly corrupt and, who were behind a lot of the sort of cartelization of the oil in Venezuela. They were said to be responsible for it. It is not clear how long they will stay. For all they might stay on,
Right. We don't know whether the US is going to prop up its own leader there, whether it's going to occupy Venezuela, or whether it's going to sort of remotely control it.
Absolutely. And in a long gestation business like petroleum, unless there is enough visibility on what to expect over a short-term period, and by that mean at least 15 to 20 years, the people would be hesitant to invest in. In fact, Chevron, the only American company and the only foreign company from the Western Hemisphere that is invested in Venezuela, has a joint venture with PDVSA. And they have a minority stake in this JV. But beyond that, pretty much nobody's invested. And the other thing also is that, South America is a slightly volatile kind of a place where, things can turn around quickly, people can get onto the street. So I was talking to an oil executive a couple of weeks ago where he said that if you notice, the pattern is that most of the European companies are more comfortable investing in offshore fields than onshore fields, because offshore, at least you have certain you're delinked somehow from the mainland, and you perhaps not really visible as a representative of a foreign company, that's taking out Venezuelan oil. So those sort of aspects are also probably being considered by these oil companies before they even think of investing.
And with the US meddling in Venezuela, has it affected the oil market at all? Has it affected the price of crude oil?
Not much. In fact, barely. And there are some reasons for it. One, there was not much Venezuelan oil that was in the market. Almost 90% of what Venezuela was producing was going to China. So it was essentially one buyer that was taking up all of that. So given that it was not in the market, whatever happens to that, there can only be an upside. In the sense, if you have American refineries in the Gulf of Mexico now suddenly refining the oil and supplying it in the market, you could have more oil coming into the market over a short to medium kind of a time horizon. But all of this was going to China. But then the other aspect also is that not many refineries can handle the Venezuelan crude. No? So they won't be ready buyers out in the market like they would for American shale or West Asian medium or light crudes. So yes, I mean, this will not really have a big impact in the oil market.
And so considering all these different challenges that we've talked about, is the assessment that this intervention was not very well thought out?
It is possible because a lot of the oil companies, it is said, were taken aback by the operation that the US did and this announcement that followed about America's interests in Venezuelan oil. Because, there's been a lot of chatter in the oil business about the American shale producers opposing this now. Because they feel that if this oil comes into the market, they will be adversely impacted. Shale is only profitable or viable if oil prices are above $60 to $65 a barrel. If theoretically Venezuelan crude were to come in, there is a chance that oil prices could go down, which would make shale unviable. But very clearly, I think, like a lot of President Trump's policies, there wasn't much thought on what to do next. I think they'd planned the operation, and maybe that was a tactical success story. But beyond that, I think it's like jazz. They're improvising as they're playing.
And this is, of course, not the first time the United States has meddled to change a government in a Latin American country. In fact, between 1898 and 1994, it did that at least 41 times. So could you also talk a bit about what has been the US's foreign policy agenda when it comes to South America and what makes this intervention different?
The only way that this intervention is different is that President Trump has talked about it. He's made, no intention to hide the fact that oil is the target. He might have talked about narcotics, etc., as a backgrounder earlier on. But quite clearly, from the time that they extracted President Maduro, he's been very clear that it's the oil that he's after. And if you notice that there is a pattern to it, I mean, this is what he tried doing with Ukraine as well, where this rare earths agreement was ostensibly, the occasion for President Zelensky to come into that Oval Room, discussion, which ended in a bit of a slugfest. But here also, the only way I think this is really different is that they've been upfront about it. They've not made any pretense or any attempt to sort of hide it. They've just been pretty much out in the open on this.
Right, in the past, when the US has done these kind of interventions and operations, critics and watchdogs have pointed out that, it's really about oil. But here you have the president openly saying that, yes, it is about oil.
Absolutely. And he's not used the other cover that they always use to bring in democracy, to bring in a lot of, a regime change to help the people. All of that smoke screens not being used this time around. And the other thing is to perhaps make it clear to the Chinese and the Russians that this is our domain. This is our sphere of influence. And that takes us back to the so-called Monroe Doctrine, wherein essentially the target, at least the doctrine was targeted the Europeans. In this case, very clearly, at least the inference is that maybe this is a message to the Chinese to maybe back off a bit, because this is the area of influence of the United States. I mean, to some extent, he sort of sealed that. And that could be one broad geopolitical ramification that would be watched in several quarters. The other inference, or a longer term inference, would be that maybe the countries that are involved in Chinese projects, maybe the Belt and Road Initiative or any of the other projects, would perhaps sit back and take notice of this, because they'll say, look, this was a country that was backed by the Chinese or seen to be backed by the Chinese. The Chinese were the only customer of the one big produce that they produced. But they could not do anything to prevent the president of that country being pulled out from his bedroom and taken back to the US to face, in quotes, justice. So it is in some ways a strategic sort of message that also comes with it, is the way I would see it.
And next, we turn our attention to Chhattisgarh, where for the past 3 weeks, thousands of midday meal cooks working in government schools have been sitting in protest on the outskirts of Raipur. And all they are asking for is just one thing: wages that allow them to survive. Right now, most of these workers earn just about 66 rupees a day. And along with cooking, they are also expected to serve the students and later wash the utensils. Many of them have worked under these conditions for decades, often without being able to take a single day off. Some say they have continued working even on the day a child or a parent died, because missing work means losing their pay. The heart of the problem is that despite working for government schools, they remain outside formal labor protections. That means no job security, no regular payments, and no dignity. So to take us inside these ongoing protests and into the lives of these cooks, we are joined by the Indian Express's Jayprakash Naidu in this segment. Jayprakash, India's midday meal program feeds millions of children every day. So could you tell our listeners how critical are cooks to the success of this scheme?
So this scheme started back in 1995, and back then one single cook in Chhattisgarh was cooking meals for over 50 children, and he was earning rupees 15 per day for their work. Now, one of the cooks, she told me that she was cooking food for about 170 children back then in 1995, and that number has now come down to 60. And as you rightly said, there are nearly 12 crore children in India who are benefiting from this scheme. The idea of this scheme was, to improve the nutrition in children, combating malnutrition, social inclusion, and at the same time to increase the school attendance and decrease the dropout rates in schools. So from this, you can get an idea how crucial their work is.
Right, and we know that midday meal cooks in Chhattisgarh have been on an indefinite strike for around 21 days now. So what are they exactly asking for? And also, what pushed them to go on strike?
Yeah, so at present, they are getting paid rupees 66 per day, and they want rupees 340 per day for their work. So back in June, they had warned that they will go on an indefinite strike if their demands are not met, but the government did not pay heed to their demands. So now, 6 months later, they have begun the strike.
And Jayprakash, what all do we know about these midday meal cooks and their background?
So a majority of them are women who are, homemakers, and for them it's like a part-time job, like an additional source of income. Even many men are doing this work, but the government expects that, this job can be done in 2 hours, but they say that it takes up to 5 hours.
Right, and so given that, how does a typical work day look like for them?
Yeah, so as I was saying, the government thinks that this work can be done in 2 hours, but they say that it takes up to 5 hours. So a cook will first start his day by reaching the school, and then where he'll have to clean the rice, he'll have to cook the rice, dal, vegetables, some achar, and this has to be done for over 30 children, sometimes 50, 60, depending on the school. And then they also have to help in serving the food and then washing the utensils. So they say that this takes a lot of time. It cannot be done in 2 hours.
Right, and as you mentioned earlier, that currently they are paid 66 rupees per day. So how harsh are the conditions for them?
Yes, so rupees 66 per day would be just about 2,000 a month, and all of them, they come from economically backward sections, and they were telling me that their children are unable to complete their college. They have taken loans of 50,000 to 90,000. The rising prices has hit them hard. One of them was telling me that they cannot buy tomatoes. They go to the market, they see things, but they cannot buy it.
And Jayprakash, you highlight how several cooks describe being under pressure and say that they don't feel respected in the system, right?
Yes, so we also have to understand the level of commitment that they have. You have to cook on a daily basis. The secretary of this association, Meghraj Baghel, he was telling me that, the commitment is such that he cooked the meals for the school children on the day his father died. And when he was telling this to me, a woman named Sukrita Chavan from Rajnandgaon, she, almost cried and said that she also cooked meals for the school children on the day her daughter died. And then another woman started saying that they feel neglected because, if there's a district function or a school function, function, then other workers like, the Mitanian, the Anganwadi workers, they are felicitated for their work, but they are never felicitated for their work. So they feel neglected.
And another striking thing that you write is that how some cooks also worry about losing work if student numbers fall in a school. So how real is this fear?
Yes, so this is real because it has already happened in some districts like Durg and Dhamtari, I have been told. And with parents opting private schools over government schools, they fear that more cooks will lose their jobs. So what they are saying is, say for example, there are 30 school children, then there should be one cook. If there are about 50 to 60, then there should be another cook. But what happens is, if say for example, the number of students comes down to 40, then one of the cooks is removed. And then just one person cooks the food for that 40 children. So they are saying that should not be the case. The cooks should be given some other work, or they should not be removed from their jobs.
And Jayprakash, beyond low wages, some cooks say that payments are also delayed and that they are asked to work during events like elections without additional pay. So how do workers describe this?
Yes, so see, for them, it's like an additional source of income, but something goes wrong with the government is not able to pay the dues. Like, for example, there was one woman who was telling me that she was not getting her dues from October. And then there's another cook whose name is Pankaj Pramanik. So he said that he felt like a bonded laborer. So he said this because of the poverty that they are going through. They end up taking loans, to fund their children's education or for some other work. And then to repay the loans, they have to take up some work, whatever work they get. And then in such a case, the government does not pay them anything extra if they work during school functions or put in some additional days of work. A point in case over here is, since post-COVID, the last 16 days of June, they are not paid for it. So when they say that we have worked for that 16 days and we should be paid, they are told that we get the money only for 10 months. Okay, the scheme is there for 10 months. And this 15 days get adjusted when you also get holidays on school holidays.
And also, Jayprakash, this is not the first time midday meal cooks have protested, right?
Yes, so back in 1995, the first wages that they used to get was rupees 15 per day. So in 2003 to 2004, they started protesting. And then 6 to 7 years down the line, their daily wages were increased from rupees 15 to rupees 33. Then again in 2019, they protested. Again in 2023, they were protests. And then now it has got stuck at rupees 2,000 per month. That is rupees 66 per day.
And so how has the government responded to this?
So I honestly did not get any response. I contacted a couple of ministers and I also contacted an concerned IAS officer, but they did not comment on the issue. But one government source, he did tell me that there is a proposal of increasing their wages by rupees 1,000 and that would make it rupees 3,000 a month or say rupees 100 per day.
And lastly, Jayprakash, have the strikes left an impact on the children or the families who heavily depend on the midday meal program like we discussed earlier?
Yeah, so as of now, the protest has not erupted. There are some several hundred of midday meal workers who are protesting there at one point of time. And they are protesting for 3 days. Like they are coming in batches. And after the 3 days protest, they then go back. But if it continues, if the protest intensifies, then it may create a problem for the scheme. And then, we may have problems where the government will have to hire cooks to, continue with the scheme.
And in the end, we take a look at a communal flare-up in Assam following a road accident leading to the deployment of the Rapid Action Force. The incident began in the Karegaon area on Monday, part of the Bodoland territorial region, where a vehicle carrying 3 people from the Bodo community hit 2 people from the Adivasi community. Police said others then joined in and attacked the people inside the vehicle. As reported by the Indian Express's Sukrita Baruah, 1 person died from injuries while 4 others were reported to be under treatment at Kokrajhar Medical College and Hospital. Kokrajhar police said they detained 19 people on Monday night and began an investigation. On Tuesday, tensions between the 2 communities increased, with groups blocking the national highway near the Karegaon police outpost. Police said tires were burned, some houses were set on fire, an office building was torched, and there was an attempt to attack the police outpost. Police said force was used against stone pelters as both sides attempted to clash. Baruah notes that the Assam Home Department issued an order suspending mobile internet services across Kokrajhar until further orders, citing concerns that social media and internet could be used to spread inflammatory messages and rumors, leading to further escalation. Meanwhile, Bodoland Territorial Council Chief Hagrama Mohilari appealed for peace and said a third party was trying to aggravate the situation and politicize it. He said both Adivasis and Bodos are residents of the region and should maintain peace. Chief Minister Himanta Biswa Sarma also appealed for cooperation from community leaders and political figures, urging support for the government to restore normalcy. You were listening to Three Things by the Indian Express. Today's show was edited and mixed by Suresh Pawar and produced by Shashank, Bhargava and me, Ichha Sharma. If you like the show, do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcast. You can also recommend it to someone you think may like it, with a friend or in your family. This is the best way for people to get to know about us. You can also tweet us at Express Podcast or write to us at podcast@indianexpress.com.